our churches, and I hate to use the term religious institutions, but our churches at the time, the black church was heavily involved. In fact, they were basically the source of education for our people, the source of everything. It centered around the church. I feel as though now we can't depend on these public schools to educate our children. It's clear that they have failed. It's clear. We need churches, mosques, and Hebrew temples to be involved in educating our children in a real way. And I'm not talking about trying to proselytize children. I'm talking about educate our children. Give our children the tools to be able to search for knowledge. Give me your opinion on this. Why hasn't it been working? Because some religious institutions have schools. In your opinion, why hasn't this worked?
I think one of the reasons why it hasn't is because although chain slavery has been transformed into brain slavery, you still, because it's still slavery, many of us don't have the initiative to do what is in our own best interest unless we're made to. We have to remember something. Under segregation, we prospered because we were forced to do for ourselves. But under integration, you're not forced to do for yourself. If you choose, you can neglect community and simply try to hide yourself amongst the white people. So a lot of black folk still have that internal self-hatred, and many of us still suffer from the personality deficiency of self-reliance. I mean, we just got finished spending $50 billion on Christmas gifts. $50 billion on Christmas gifts nationally for one day. With that type of money, we could have built an independent African school for every black boy in America with that kind of money. So clearly, we have the economic resources to build schools, but here's the stark reality that we have to recognize. White folk don't like black boys, but black people don't care about them too much more. This is very key. We talk about what the system does, but we don't talk about what we don't do. Our degree of neglect is equal to the degree of oppression that our children experience in the school. So every time they're expelled, put on drugs, thrown in special ed unnecessarily, we are an accomplice to each and every one of those expulsions, each and every one of them who drop out, because we have the resources to do, but simply don't care enough to make it a reality.
I'm going to try to squeeze a couple of more callers in here because we're almost up against it. Let's go to Mo in North Philly. Mo?
Yeah, Assalamu alaikum, Brother Johnson, Dr. Johnson.
You ain't talking to us tonight, Brother Mo?
Yes, y'all messing my nights up with Sinatra, man. Yeah, man, I have to agree with that brother 1,000,000,000%, man. But I want to ask him a question. Last week on one of the shows, they had a host that was dealing with the situation between the difference between blacks in Africa and the Caribbean and here in America. And one of the things was that they were saying that the blacks that come over here take more advantage of the opportunities as opposed to blacks who are already here. And to me, it seems like the deck is already stacked against the African-American black male that grow up here in America. And other Africans from around the world don't see that. They think that they could just come over here and they're in the land of milk and honey, and they fail to realize the barriers that we broke down during the 60s that made it possible for them to have the opportunity, but we can't get them opportunity because they are afraid of us, afraid of the Afro-American black male here in America. And like globally, the whites ever on a global level is afraid of the black male, period. But the whites over here in America is afraid of this Afro-American male. That's number one. Number two, as a Muslim, I have a problem with other Muslims who think that there's no such thing as racism in the world, and we got to love everybody. We got to acquiesce our humanity and integrate with everybody and forget where we come from. When you look at what the Honorable Elijah Muhammad did, he started an alternative education institution known as Muhammad University of Islam, took the children out of the public schools and developed their own school system. But now you have some people who once followed him want to call him a black racist or black separate, that he taught black supremacy. Now, I'd like to know your opinion on that, sir.
Thank you for your call, Brother Mo.
Well, I do agree with you. My brother Jacob, who called, and there's a few other brothers who are racially conscious, but I do agree. I grew up Muslim in Philadelphia, and Philadelphia has the largest percentage of Muslims of the large cities in this country, and we should be a political tornado or earthquake. We should be making changes in all facets for black people in this country. But I agree with you. Unfortunately, amongst the large majority of Sunni Muslims in this city, they have no racial consciousness and don't want none. And I'm speaking from experience. I was raised Muslim, so I can say it. There's very few imams in this city who deal with any black issues whatsoever, and if they do, it's only secondary to the Muslim thing. This colorblind Islam, for me is a big problem. I'm a Garveyite. I'm a Pan-Africanist. I'm an African before I'm anything else, and no religion is going to make me turn my back on my racial group membership, nor is it going to make me treat it like a minor concern. Because you get brothers who say, well, I know I'm black and I'm not denying my Africanity. Yes, but you're also not mobilizing behind it to help your people. So I agree with you. It is a national issue, and it's not just Islam. A lot of the religions, even Christianity, have handcuffed themselves to a colorblind, politically neutral sort of orientation, which is not in the best interest of black people. And as my brother Jacob said when we were talking a few days ago, it forces a lot of black conscious brothers and sisters to not be interested in Islam, to not be interested in going into the church, because if I have to give up who I am for what I believe, then you can keep your beliefs, and I'm going to keep who I am. Because a religion should not force you to abandon your culture. And
Dr. Johnson, when our enemy looks at us, they look at a color. They have it zeroed in on their scope, a color.
Bingo.
Dr. Johnson, this is an interesting discussion, and what you're leaving off on, I want to pick up on that same topic next week if you can squeeze in your schedule to be on.
Sure.
I'll reach out to you during the week. Dr. Johnson, talk about the need for religious community among African Americans to seriously get involved in education.
The religious community is key. When you look at our history, it were the churches that started the first schools. Education actually grew out of the black church. The problem now is that a lot of the education that the churches are giving out, it is directed into a certain religious sort of a theosophy. And what we need them to do is, to some degree, they don't have to divorce their theology from the instruction that they're providing, but they need to make sure that the instruction is available for children who are not of the same religion, and that the instruction is actually competitive with the various curriculums that we see a lot of the white private schools offering. We don't want to mimic the white private schools, but we do want the instruction that the black schools and the religious schools are giving our children to prepare them to be able to do well on standardized testing and SAT, and to also help them gain that much-needed scholarship money that many of our children are going to need because we can't afford to pay for them to go to college. So, the problem is twofold. Number one, the churches that do support education aren't doing enough. They help some children, but they have it within their capacity to help more. Then you have some churches that aren't helping at all. And across the board, whether we're talking about the charter schools or the church schools, many of them, their curriculum is not as challenging as the curriculums of the white schools. I mean, you do have your exceptions. You have Veronica Joyner, obviously, with the mathematics, physics, and science, and there are others. But unfortunately, I think our curriculums are not being kept competitive. We add a religious component. We add an African-centered component. But the core math and the core science and the core reading, the core language arts is lacking. So we have to make sure that we're keeping up with the times. We're in the 21st century. But unfortunately, a lot of our church curriculums and our independent African school curriculums have not kept pace with the time.
In my opinion, I think that some of the religious institutions that are involved in education is more involved in proselytizing the children than educating them. I don't know how you feel about it, but also I'd like your opinion. I think the ideology of our churches, temples, and mosques is more Eurocentric, maybe than they realize, than African-centered. Because if it was more African-centered, I don't think we'd have this problem. Talk about that in your opinion, Doctor.
Well, I totally agree with you. I definitely believe that they're more Eurocentric than Afrocentric. First of all, the colorblind philosophy that many of our religious institutions are working off of is of no benefit at all to the masses of people. Our churches our mosques, our temples, they're all teaching that we're not supposed to look at color. And if you don't look at color, you can't see yourself, you can't see your children, and you can't see your own predicament. And I want to contrast the current wave of religious philosophy with the traditional wave. I mean, if you look at the 19th and 20th century, if you were Muslim, you were still black and proud. If you were Christian, you were still black and proud. But now we have this new post-racial religious philosophy where the Muslims are raising their children to only identify as being Muslim. They do not identify with history, culture, heritage, or their biological connection with other people who look like them in this country or anywhere else. The same thing is happening in a lot of churches, and it's very dangerous because what's happening now is we're witnessing a situation where black children, if they are Muslim or if they are children, they are necessarily a traitor to their own people because their parents are teaching them that you need not be concerned with who you are. Who you are is irrelevant. The only thing you should care about is what you believe. That is one of the most dangerous pieces of propaganda that's being put on black children, and it's coming through the religious leadership.
You know, I'd have to agree with what you're saying because I wholeheartedly concur that a lot of the philosophies being taught it's detrimental to our children, and I think that it's being shown because of the loss of a lot of children being at these religious institutions. Some of them are there because their parents forced them, but you don't really see the real vigor or real zest for them to be at these places. As soon as they get of age, they basically go on to other things, go on about their business. Their life is dedicated towards something else or other than what they were raised in. But one of the things that I really look at in what you're saying is when you talked about the need for the math, the sciences, the reading to be taught in the churches, you know, it really is no benefit if you have a child sitting in church, a temple or mosque, and talking about Jesus or whomever they claim to believe in, and can't read it if you give him a book, or can't comprehend the messages that these men were talking about because they don't really understand what they're reading. It's necessary that we put these things back in our churches because that is the only way we're going to save our young folk and maybe some of these adults that can hardly comprehend and read themselves. Because if we keep depending on these public schools, they're not doing it and they're not going to do it. That is clear. Go ahead, Dr. Johnson.
In fact, the public school's agenda is to make sure that children don't learn. See, remember now, in order to justify mass incarceration, in order to justify the program of the eugenics movement, which is mass extermination, in order to justify, you have to reduce black people to a total dependency on your system. I want to be clear. You have to make the victim totally dependent on you for their existence. Because once you make them totally dependent on you, they now look like a race of defectives because they can't stand on their own, and the whole world will support your program to rid yourself of their existence. See, people who are not independent are always at risk of either being exterminated or put back into slavery because your existence is totally at the mercy of another group. And once your existence is at the mercy of another group, they can then put forth the argument that maybe we would be doing these people more mercy if we got rid of them. In other words, would it be a form of benevolence and gratitude to get them off this planet and out this country? Because obviously they can't find a way to function on their own. So the school's job is to make it so the child can't stand on his own, so he can't earn on his own, so he can't build on his own, so he has to rely on them. And if you're effectively able to do that, then you're able to convince everybody else that maybe we all would be better off if we just got rid of all of them. So the school's job is to miseducate. And I want to separate that from many people's opinion that the school is making a mistake in miseducating. In other words, they're doing something wrong, and that's why the children aren't learning. This is the dominant attitude put forth by the bourgeoisie and the white social order. We're doing something wrong, and we simply need to find out what it is. Or the kids are doing something wrong, or the children are doing something wrong. I'm saying that we're doing something wrong, but the schools are doing everything right because their purpose is to fail the child.